Good morning and thank you for coming today. My name is David Hoovler. I'm the District Attorney here in Orange County, and I'm here to announce today an anti-human trafficking campaign that we're going to launch at the District Attorney's Office. It's something that's been in the works now for over a year. It was delayed a little bit because of COVID, but it's something that we need to talk about. And it's something we need to talk about here in Orange County and in the Hudson Valley because it's happening. Human trafficking is happening in plain sight right here in Orange County. And a lot of people, when they hear the term human trafficking, they automatically think of sex trafficking. And yes, sex trafficking is part of that, but human trafficking involves a much larger scope of activity that I want to bring some public awareness to. And I want to start with, yes, human trafficking involves sex trafficking, but it also involves forced labor, it involves coercion, it involves essentially bringing people to the United States, holding them sort of hostage until they complete some type of actions that they want. Sometimes it can be a farm worker, sometimes it could even be help in a house with somebody that they're being forced to do something against their will in order to achieve something. And it's not being done just for them to achieve it, it's being done for basically someone taking advantage of another person. And that's what so concerns me. But what got us to where we're at here today about this campaign that we're launching at the DA's office is, I talk all the time about things happening in plain sight. And people need to be able to recognize that there are signs of human trafficking that happen in plain sight, particularly sex trafficking. And again, I keep saying that it's happening here in Orange County and it's happening in the Hudson Valley. Because of COVID, because of the pandemic, because of everything that has been going on recently, we don't pay attention to the things that are happening out there. And while the pandemic was going on and while all this was, our lives were changing, the lives of these victims, they were still being victimized and they were still being taken advantage of. So my goal today is to basically really twofold. It's to raise awareness about this, to say that the District Attorney's Office is now going to take the lead in the county and push for awareness, particularly to the public to understand the signs of human trafficking, how to recognize it, and what to do when they see that. And a little later, you're going to hear from one of our partners, Fearless, formerly Safe Homes. They're executive directors here that we partner with that provides a lot of assistance to the victims, and they help us with the cases. And I'm sure sometime in the near future you're going to see some cases that are going to be brought here because we are increasing our enforcement on this. But what I want to talk about is what we're going to do over the next 90 days here in Orange County. You see over here we have two posters that we're putting out. The first one, she was a daughter, a friend, and now she has a price tag. It's talking about sex trafficking, making you aware. It has a pretty provocative picture. The other one is one that we see very common in prostitution rings and such. He pretended to love me, then he pimped me out. Something else provocative happens all the time. And it's happened here in Orange County in the past, and it's probably happening now. And we don't know necessarily about it, but we're going to do everything we can to bring awareness to it. How are we going to get this out to the public? Well, we have this brochure that we put together here that covers the facts about human trafficking, tells you how to recognize human trafficking, tells you a little bit about the numbers of human trafficking, and what you see with these numbers are very staggering. Most importantly though, it gives you the numbers of who to call if you recognize it. It tells you who to call if you're a victim. And our plan is to make sure that these brochures and these posters, particularly the brochures, every hotel and motel in Orange County is going to get a batch of these flyers in order to be able to recognize these things. My hope is that the hotel and motel owners will put them in each of the rooms, and from what I've been told so far, from all of them, that's going to happen. Additionally, across the table we have these specific cards right here that are designed to be placed in rooms and on tables across Orange County that basically talk about know the signs. Basically, they contain all the numbers that you need to know to call, particularly if you see it happening or you're a victim. These are going to be placed specifically in those locations. Also, we plan on taking 2 prominent billboards in Orange County in the next 90 days in order to promote this in locations that we believe that the public, that this is happening. I'm not going to disclose those exactly yet, but where the public can see them and where the public will be able to see phone numbers and such that they can call in. So that's what I'm planning to do here in the next 90 days for Orange County. And what I'm hoping is, I am hoping that the media, the public, the police, we take a harder look at this. Because again, the pandemic changed the way we do everything. And when the pandemic hit and we all got locked inside, some of these victims and some of these types of cases have dropped from the attention that they need. And my hope is, here from the District Attorney's Office, that the law enforcement individuals in Orange County, which we have a great relationship with, they continue to do their jobs. And as someone told me recently, that we're here to make sure that we protect the world from the Jeffreys, the Jeffrey Epsteins and the Jeffrey Dahmers. And that's what we're here today to make sure that we're telling the public what to look for. At this point, I'm going to ask that Kellyanne Costliera, the executive director from Fearless, come up and say a few words. They are a wonderful resource that we have here in Orange County, and they do a lot of work across the Hudson Valley, and particularly working with our victims and making sure that they get the proper care and they get the evaluation of the trauma that they suffer. I can't say enough about her agency, particularly her as the leader, but particularly the people that work for her, that you never hear their names and never see them, but respond out and do really great work at 3 o'clock in the morning when we need them. So Kellyanne, the podium is yours.
Thank you, Dave. And I'm very grateful today to continue our partnership with the District Attorney's Office, a long-standing partnership working collaboratively and collectively to address victimization. Like domestic violence, the global health epidemic we're currently living in is ripe for those who are traffickers and abusers. Globally, we're seeing an increase on our hotlines, our need for service, and the exploitation of victims, specifically the drive to online exploitation. It's important to also note that anyone can be a victim, but as evidence has showed through our national and international partners, people of color and LGBTQ people are more likely to be trafficked than any other demographic group. Long-term systemic and structural oppression, as well as discrimination inequities, continue to make it ripe for community-wide vulnerabilities. Traffickers take advantage of vulnerable people. And it's important that we work together to identify our at-risk and vulnerable populations. While we know anyone can be a victim, as we educate ourselves and work together, we need to look for potentially vulnerable populations that have unstable housing. And as we know through this pandemic, many people have been challenged with finding stable housing, keeping stable housing, a history of domestic violence, a caregiver or a family member with substance abuse, potentially someone who's viewed as a runaway or entrenched in the juvenile justice system and foster care system. We're very grateful to partner with our friends at Friends House, as well as the Department of Social Services, to work with sexually exploited and vulnerable youth, recognizing that many of our youth are at risk based upon being entrenched in many of the systems that were designed to support when there were communal or family support for those children. Our undocumented immigrants, those facing poverty and economic need, have a long history of sexual abuse, or are addicted to drugs and alcohol. We can collectively work together, and today, partnering with the District Attorney's Office, the key is education and awareness. We as a community can serve as a vessel for victims and those who are vulnerable, that if we see something, that we say something. We have to continue to build collective, cohesive responses to domestic violence and human trafficking, and work with our law enforcement partners so that we view these in the eyes of victimization and those who are profiting off the backs of human beings. We have to be informed consumers. We have to know where we put our dollars, where we purchase things, how we shop online, and how we utilize online services. As well as supporting our local programs and recognizing that victims need long-term supportive care, that they need their basic human needs met that were often used as exploitations in their trafficking. And lastly, it's critical as parents, as teachers, and as communities to recognize now more than ever that our internet is a right playing ground for traffickers, and how we identify and our children and how we give access to online, especially in the age of going remote with our children on school and education, that we understand our social media platforms, our online gaming, and our pornography sites, and that we're having conversations as a community, as families, and as partners, that we are constantly raising awareness so that we can recognize the tactics that traffickers are using to exploit the most vulnerable in our community. I am grateful to the District Attorney's Office for our longtime partnership and our continued partnership as we move forward in this. I hope that you will reach out to Fearless if you want training, education in your community, in your business, as well as your programs. The more of us that can identify and recognize the awareness and the tactics that traffickers use, and potentially the victims who are at risk, the better we will be at providing a pathway to healing and recovery for victims of trafficking. If you or someone you know, or someone that you may think is being trafficked, I would encourage you to contact Fearless's hotline at 845-562-5340. And again, thank you to the District Attorney's Office and today for the support and the opportunity to raise awareness.
Thank you, Kellyanne. Just to repeat those numbers again. If you think you're a victim or you know someone's a victim, 845-562-5340 for Fearless, and the National Human Trafficking Hotline, 888-373-7888, or you can contact your local police department. And again, I really hope that the public takes the time and takes a hard look at this, because something that I saw that led us to this is, it's in the tagline right here. It's outward appearances can be misleading. And that's very important. Outward appearances can be misleading. You have to look really deep at what's happening, and if you see something that does not look right, please just pick up the phone and let your local law enforcement know, because it's important. It will save lives, and as was previously noted by Kellyanne, I didn't touch on it too much, but the online portion of what we're seeing now because of the global pandemic and because of COVID, it has never been greater. So on that note, if you have any questions, myself or Kellyanne can take them. So
what can be done from a prosecution standpoint, from a law enforcement standpoint? I'm sure a lot of cases the victims aren't necessarily willing to come forward, so there need to be some sort of outside reporting and investigation that would take place.
Well, really three things. Number one, what we've really started to do is we've taken a trauma-informed approach to everything, and a lot of that is bringing Fearless in and bringing in the proper medical attention right at the beginning of any case that there's suspected human trafficking involved. And again, human traffic is not necessarily sexual. It can be forced labor. It can be a lot of different aspects. Human trafficking is about control. It's about forcing people to do something that they don't want to do, and sometimes it's forcing them to do something they don't want to do and holding a carrot on a stick in front of them in order to make them do that. We see that quite frequently with immigrants that are brought here and they're forced to work, and they have to work for a period of time, and then they're basically told you can just go. So the first aspect of that is we take a trauma-informed approach. We want to do everything we can to make our victims feel comfortable, get them back to some sense of normalcy, and then we focus on the prosecution. When it comes to the prosecution, it's about gathering as much evidence as quickly as we can in order to move forward with the case. And a lot of times it does require convincing people to come forward. But what we miss in those prosecution cases is we miss the regular people who saw this happening all the time, that didn't recognize it, coming forward and telling us, hey, I saw that girl at that truck stop 3 or 4 times, or I saw that person come into the mart 3 or 4 times, and every time they come in, they bought the same carton of milk, and they had $1.90 or $2.93 every time that they come in and bought that milk. And again, I am citing you something that exactly happened in Orange County, that a person walked in and bought a gallon of milk every couple days, and they had exactly $2.93, because that's what they were given to buy that milk, because they were being forced to do something here. And then I guess the third aspect of it is, the awareness, just getting everybody to understand this is a problem, we need to be aware of it, and you need to, if you see something, say something. I hate to say that we say that a lot in law enforcement as a prosecutor, but without the people, we can't make the cases. And people have to be willing to step forward and become involved. So those three things, I think, really help where we want to go. And I think you will be seeing an uptick in these type of cases, prosecution-wise in Orange County in the near future. And again, when those cases happen, we're doing everything we can to make sure we put the victims back to normal.
I know you said that a lot of people might not realize that it's happening here in Orange County. Can you talk about the timing of this press conference? You mentioned that COVID was a breeding ground for an uptick in these cases. Are we really seeing, that now?
Yes, as Kellyanne said, the online aspect is just jumping off the charts, and domestic violence has also risen. I wanted to do this. This was something I wanted to do last fall. It got delayed because of certain things happening, and then COVID and the pandemic hit. But it's definitely the reason we're having it now is because the spikes are noticeable. They're continuing. They don't show a lot of signs of dropping at this point, and it's alarming. And that's why we're here today, and that's why we're talking about it. And again, I could have added into this press conference, Kellyanne talked about domestic violence. We could talk about that also, because there's been an appreciable uptick in that. And again, it's very hard to get the assistance to people whenever you're in a lockdown situation of COVID and things like that. So it is difficult, but the idea is we got to make sure people know that there's a place they can reach out for help. Any law enforcement agency, Fearless, the district attorney's office, we are here to help. You got to be able to pick up the phone, or you got to find a way to contact us, and we'll be here to help. Anything for Kellyanne? Or are we good?
Well, with I don't know, either one of you want to answer this. Just with so many people with the pandemic going into the virtual world to escape, they're depressed, they're isolated. What is it, parents or even loved ones should be watching for as a sign that maybe somebody online is trying to get to one of their loved ones? What are some of the signs or something that they should be watching out for?
Well, I definitely think we have to be as educated as we can around what platforms people in our home are using, and not just what they're using, but how they work. I think it's really important to go to something like YouTube and Google or YouTube and look up the apps and the platforms and really understand how they work, so that you know the back end as well, that you know the pitfalls to some of our commonly used apps that our teens are using right now, that are used to connect teens, especially during this pandemic, that are used by traffickers and those who want to exploit. And a lot of times it's very hard to know who's on the other end. And I think obviously changes in behavior, or meaning around being more withdrawn, possibly having possessions of things that they could not have afforded themselves or had access to. So I think it's just really important to reach out if you don't know. I know many of us are learning about all these apps, and the apps are coming very fast and very quickly. And they're difficult to really address. And so the better we can around education and being involved, and asking lots of questions. Look, our kids are supposed to navigate these things and make lots of mistakes, and are cognitively at a different level than adults. And certainly exploiters are banking on that. And so we can't just assume that the apps that were built for our kids were in fact protecting our kids too. And so we need to pay attention to our online gaming apps, because we know traffickers are jumping on these online gaming apps and befriending and looking for vulnerabilities in friendships, and or meeting some of those basic human needs. Even the need to be loved or connected, or food, shelter, clothing, or being seen are really vulnerabilities for individuals. And this is a ripe ground for it during COVID, very much so. And understanding that traffickers can look like anyone. As Dave pointed out, with those who are being prostituted, a lot of times people have this image of traffickers. They can be anyone, including family and perceived friends, or someone who masked themselves at the beginning as a potential intimate partner, when in fact the intention from the very beginning was to traffic that person and to prostitute that person. So it's important to not be looking for something that we have made up in our head. Traffickers can be anyone in a victim's life, and we have to become more aware of that as well. And so not just assuming that even families are safe. So just asking lots of questions for those of our victims and survivors that we're working with. And if something doesn't seem right, then it's possible that it may not be right.
Kellyanne, we were talking off camera about the increase in calls for help that Fearless is getting across the board from regarding victims of sex trafficking, human trafficking, domestic violence. And obviously that goes along with the purpose of being here today. Can you kind of reiterate that publicly, that you guys are really seeing numbers off the charts at this point?
We have absolutely had an increase in our hotline. Initially, right when the pandemic started, there wasn't an increase, but once kind of we got into what we realized was going to be much longer than we all had anticipated, the calls had continued to increase. And once we introduced our web chat, that also provided a new avenue for people who could not safely get on a phone because they were trapped with either their abuser and or trafficker, and getting on a phone was no longer safe because they were not allowed to leave the home, but web chatting gave us an additional increase. But now that things have, the restrictions have, lifted slightly, we're definitely seeing a huge increase. We've been very worried though about our juvenile victims, as well as those who are working within our Safe Harbor program. And so the contact has continued, but initially there was limited contact because most of that contact is often through phones and text messages. Many of the kids are either within the system, so working with our partners through the Department of Social Services, or many of them had been on the streets and are viewed as runaways. And so the ability to reconnect with them, and certainly they are extremely vulnerable and have seen an increase in violence used, and also an increase in violence, and I think even those who are the demand are taking advantage of this moment during COVID. And as we are all trying to get all of our self in this virtual world, they are certainly taking advantage of that on the demand side too.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you. Dave, just kind of like anecdotally, have any of these calls for help resulted in, prosecution or arrests? Anything like that we can say,
Yes,
that's
there,
safe?
there has been.
Okay,
There has been. I think overall the increase has been about 17% year to date.
17% for human trafficking cases?
17% domestic violence, human trafficking altogether.
Okay.